Water these first layers until they feel like a wrung out sponge. This is treasure. We started this pile in June. We've covered it with black plastic to keep out excess wind and keep the moisture in. Very important. We're going to show you what pretty much finished compost looks like. And then we're going to pull out some of that compost before we add so we can layer it with our new material. Then we're going to start adding some of our fresh material. This is a mix of carbon and nitrogen. Before we water it, we are going to mix it. And then we're going to take our hose and we're going to slowly water it. You can see we're not going really too heavy or anything like that. We want that water to feel like a wrung out sponge. And we're going to go ahead and add some more green and brown material, mixed, pre-chopped up, many different textures. When we mix it the second time, we're just opening up new sites for decomposition. And then we're watering it again until it feels like a wrung out sponge in order to get the process started again. And this pile will break down very quickly. Lots of green material. So the green material with more water is going to make the pile heat up, and the brown stems are going to give it structure. Ideally, when we build a compost pile, we want it to be a minimum of a cubic yard in volume. We don't have that now. We're starting with what we have. And as you can see, this is not any high-tech bin. This is cement blocks. It has air that's allowed on the side. We're putting all the material in, and we're moving it more towards the back to make this bin as high as possible. Once a week, we would take off the plastic cover of this pile, pull material out, and flip it over so that we're pulling material in from the sides to the middle and flipping it top to bottom, giving our bacteria and fungi new areas to eat. At that time, we can dig in small quantities of non-meat food scraps. So we're going to finish up the process, covering it with plastic. Again, we have the holes at the side for aeration. And we're just going to keep the plastic down with some rocks. Very low-tech system. If you're using compost to enrich soil for perennials, you do not need to screen it. What goes through this 1/4-inch hardware cloth is material which is very appropriate for using in a seeding operation when you're planting seeds or your transplants in the spring for vegetables. The closer you are to planting time, the finer the material should be. So there are lots of containers that are on the market for composting, but we really don't recommend any of them. They're just really basically a place to store your compost or contain it. So whether you choose to use a homemade container, the important thing is the process that the material needs to undergo is exactly the same. Doesn't matter if you use a tumbler or a bin or a free-form pile. To align healthy soils with healthy people through composting, through healthy living. I love that.
Denver Animal Protection received a call from police dispatch with a report of an injured cat on I-70 near the I-25 exit. Officer Schillinger and ride-along observer Rita Aragon were first to respond.
I was doing a ride-along, which is an opportunity we have here at the shelter to ride with a field officer out in the community. And as a person who does a ride-along, you basically sit as a sidekick and you observe and look at their daily activities. So of course we respond to all of those calls to make sure the animal is safe. Traffic's going really quickly, we're driving really slowly, a little bit slower. She turns on her lights. I saw what looked like a little fuzzball right in the bottom part of the median. We saw a head pop up, cat's face. It was so exciting. We both screamed, "Oh my gosh, it's alive!" And, it was just one of those, like, your heart just, adrenaline starts pumping. You're like, we have to get her off this freeway. The animal protection officers do this on a daily basis. They get such a variety of calls. This one was just a little bit more exciting because it happened to be on the freeway.
Staff at the shelter named the sweet-natured feline Twinkie. The cat had suffered a minor abrasion to its chin, which doesn't detract from her beauty in the least.
Oh, we're so happy to say the cat right at this very moment is getting spayed here at Denver Animal Protection. That's part of the process in order to be put up for adoption. From the moment either we get a call to respond to an animal that's already in the community or that a community member does come and bring them to the shelter, we, from intake to vet services to animal care to behavior, our goal is to make sure the animal is in the best condition and care in order to be put in the best place: adoption, transfer, or return to their owner.
The Denver Animal Shelter provides animal care and protective services for all of Denver County. To learn more about the full range of services, visit denvergov.org/animal shelter.
Welcome to the Finance and Governance Committee of Denver City Council. This meeting of the Finance and Governance Committee begins now.
Good afternoon. I am Amanda Sawyer, Denver City Council District 5 and chair of the FinGov Committee. Thanks so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my other council members, starting on all the way to the left.
Robin Kinich, at large.
Good afternoon, Kevin Flynn, Southwest Denver District 2.
Chris Hines, Perfect 10.
Great, thank you. And I believe we have Councilwoman Sita Baca online.
Yes. Good afternoon, Candy Sebebaca, District 9.
Great, thank you. And we also have Councilwoman Black joining us today, who is going to be presenting. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and get started?
Yep, thank you very much. My name is Kendra Black. I represent District 4 in Southeast Denver. And today is a momentous day. This is something that I've been working on with Clerk Lopez and his team and our staff, Councilwoman Sawyer, Councilman Flynn, and our attorneys for a year now. So I'm really excited that we've gotten to this point. I'll just run through some of the initial slides. They are repeats of slides you have all seen multiple times, but I just kept them in the PowerPoint so they would be on the record. Starting in January, Clerk Lopez and I co-chaired the Ballot Access Modernization Committee, also called the BAM, to look at some of the issues with citizen initiative, citizen referendum, and council referrals of ballot measures. These are the people who served on the BAM, again, including Councilwoman Sawyer and Councilman Flynn. Thank you for serving on that. These were some of the issues that were identified in the 2021 election. I'm not going to go over them because we've talked about them before, but there they are. These are the meetings. So the Ballot Access Modernization Group met 5 times, January through May, and Council, this is our 8th meeting. We have met seven times about this for discussion. Today, we're going to quickly review the process, review some of the recommendations, and we will discuss and vote on 2 charter change referred ballot measures. There are companion ordinances that we also will need to discuss, but they are not prepared yet, and we will be discussing them at the August 9th Finance and Governance Committee meeting. This is a repetition of a slide that just sort of summarizes all of the topics we discussed. It's been in multiple presentations, but it's an easy reference if you just want it on one page. Quickly, I'll run through all of the issues. This one is about the way initiatives and measures are numbered. And we all agreed that it's very confusing, for example, to have an initiative 300 every single year. So the clerk is going to number them differently consecutively, and they can do that without any kind of ordinance, but their attorney has suggested that we do put it into an ordinance so it can be into the code. We all agreed that a single subject requirement is best practice, and that is part of the ordinance we'll be looking at today. That would be a charter change. The ballot title setting, the clerk made a recommendation, which is the first two bullet points, and then after a lot of discussion, we all requested that if the clerk made any changes to the draft title that was submitted, that we would have the city attorney sign off on it. So again, that will be part of the charter change measure we'll talk about today, and then there will be more details in the forthcoming ordinance. Citizen referendum, there was a lot of confusion in 2021 when referendum F was on the ballot with council referred measures. Referendum F was a citizen initiative, and it was to repeal a council ordinance. And so that was sort of confusing that there would be a repeal of a council ordinance with council referred measures. Also, there was some confusion about what a yes or no vote meant. So we came up with this solution. Again, it'll be part of the charter change and then part of the companion ordinance. Training and compliance for committees and circulators. The clerk's office wants to mirror state law on this, and that will be a part of the ordinance. The ballot information booklet, we've had a lot of discussion on that, and I just wanted to remind everyone that by state law, all Tabor issues have to be notified to voters. So we did discuss what would happen if we got rid of this 2018 law, that we would have a ballot information booklet. But the fact remains for Tabor measures, we have to notify the voters. So we didn't go any further with discussing whether we wanted to get rid of it or not. We're going to keep it, but I just wanted to let you know that if we did decide to get rid of it, we would still have to do it for Tabor issues, and most measures really are Tabor issues. So anyway, that's that title. Denver is the only city that has a ballot booklet for non-Tabor issues. These were some of the concerns we talked about with the ballot information booklet, and the tight timeline is one of the biggest challenges for the clerk's office. This is the timeline for the ballot information booklet, just as an FYI. And these are the updates that we will discuss on August 9th that will be part of the companion ordinances and a possible council rule change. So the clerk's office would like to move the deadline for the pro and con comments to 60 days, require the fiscal analysis to be 75 days out rather than 60, and then we talked about a possible council rule to create a 90-day council deadline to refer. Other updates include allowing the clerk to collect and summarize input both in favor and against reinitiated and council referred. And then we had some discussion on creating either a formal or an informal process. We need to clarify who can submit pro and con, if we should solicit them, and if council staff and the clerk staff might want to work together on summarizing those. Again, we'll discuss that further on August 9th. Again, ordinance and possible rule. This is not related to the ballot information booklet or ballot measures, but the clerk recommended a couple changes to candidate timelines. The first we talked about a lot, and this body was fine with it. The first was to change the deadline for candidate petitions from 55 days to 75 days. That is part of this charter change today. And there's also something on here that you have not seen before that was brought to the attention of our attorney on Shilbaga. And we need to update the timeline for a vacancy election from 30 to 60 days to 75 to 89 days. And the reason why is it conflicts with the deadline for the candidate petitions. It also conflicts with the principles of the UOCAVA mailing deadline. And it's also important to note that if, per current law, if there is an election scheduled within 90 days, there will not be a special election. We've got two charter changes we're talking about today. The second one is about signatures. We had a long discussion about this at our last meeting. These are signature requirements for some of our peer cities, just as an FYI, but we did talk about this for a long time at, I think, our June 27th meeting. We discussed a desire for a minimum level of citywide support to get an initiative on the ballot. One example that someone shared was that in 2021, we had 6 initiatives that made the ballot, but 5 were defeated with over 60% voting no. But the idea is to ensure regional representation and participation in the signature gathering process to ensure that residents from all parts of the city participate. We would require signatures from every council district for citizen-initiated measures. And note that this would not apply to charter amendments. The statewide example that we talked about in June was the state constitutional amendment 71. And some of the reason behind that is people who live in Colorado outside of the Front Range felt like Front Range voters were dominating what would be on the ballot. And so they wanted more regional representation. And so Amendment 71 was passed by the voters, and it requires that 2% of the registered voters who live in each of the state's 35 Senate districts would need to sign a petition in order to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot. This is a chart that we talked about, some different scenarios. In the top, I have the current number of registered voters, which is 449,000. The next column shows 2% of active registered voters that are needed to get on the ballot. So it's about 9,000 today if you want to get something on the ballot. And then the rows below that show how many registered voters are in each council district. And then it shows some different scenarios. So the third column shows 2% of the active registered voters in that council district. So for District 1, there's 47,000 registered voters. 2% of that would be 845. If we went with 1%, it would be 472. If we went with a different scenario, which is what I'm proposing today in the green column, this would be the same number from every council district. And I've talked to most of the council members, and I think most people agree that they like this model the best because it would be easier for the petition gatherers to just have the same number across the board. And some of the feedback I got from council members is they liked this more modest amount of 180, and that would be 2% of the number of signatures required on the ballot. So today we've got item 1, which is a referred charter change that has these updates: the single subject requirement, ballot title setting updates, candidate timeline updates, and moving the fixes for the referendum issues to ordinance. The second one is a referred charter change to update signature requirements for initiatives and referendum, require that 2% of the total required signatures come from each district, which today is 180 signatures. And I just put that bullet point below there showing that the total today would be 1,980 signatures, so it would be 22% of the total signatures needed. And then again, this item number 3, on August 9th, I'll come back here with the companion ordinances that we will tackle these other issues. And that's all I have. And I'd love to hear your questions, comments, feedback.
Great, thank you. Well, before we get started with public comment, I want to acknowledge our clerk and reporter, Paul Lopez is here. Thanks for joining us, and to your staff, thanks for being here. So we have 2 speakers signed up for public comment. I believe both are in chambers. The first is Annalise Steele. And so just a reminder for public comment, everyone will get 2 minutes. And since this is my first time running public comment, do you guys want to keep that 2 minutes, or you want me to do it? You got it? Yeah? Okay, great. Thanks, Markesia. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Chairwoman Sawyer and members of the committee. My name is Annalise Steele, and I represent Colorado Concern. We're a nonpartisan alliance of 135 top executives with a common interest in enhancing and protecting the Centennial State's business climate. Our offices and the offices of many of our members are based right here in the city. On behalf of these leaders who collectively employ more than 178,000 Coloradans, I encourage you to support the recommendations from the Ballot Measure Modernization Working Group. We were pleased when Councilwoman Black and Clerk Lopez took on the initiative, as there are several significant opportunities to improve city elections. Colorado has some of the strongest ballot access in the nation, and it is in the best interest of all Denverites to model city elections on the excellent example set by our state. Our state initiative process is transparent and protects all voices. It takes effort to get a measure on the ballot, but the process is fair and accessible. We have watched the work of this committee and wish to affirm our support for the following recommendations. A single subject requirement reduces confusion for voters and ensures that measures that would not otherwise win support on their own do not get grouped with other popular measures. It also makes fiscal impact analysis, an improvement we support, more reliable. Additionally, robust and impartial ballot review booklet is necessary for fair elections. The current booklet is written by proponents with little ability for the city to edit text going to voters. Ballot booklets should be objective analysis, not campaign literature. We support the recommendation that signatures for citywide initiatives be required to be collected from all districts. Colorado Concern championed Raise the Bar, which required a similar reform at the state level, a change that has strengthened the voice of rural Colorado. Ballot proponents should be required to pitch their change across the city, not simply travelers coming out of Union Station, and this will result in better policy. Furthermore, we support a robust process for title setting. We've gone to the state title board, and the process cuts both ways. However, the process is fair and considers both proponents and opponents alike, protecting all stakeholder interests. These, along with other suggestions from the committee, will improve elections. The 2021 ballot was confusing for voters. It included conflicting measures, repeated initiative numbers, and uncertainty around what a yes vote meant for a repeal effort.
Thank you. That's the time that you've got.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And our next speaker is Kate Barton, who I believe is also in chambers. There you are. Hey, Kate.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of FinGov. My name is Kate Barton. I'm the Chief of External Affairs of the Downtown Denver Partnership, and we are here today in support of the ballot measure reform that is being brought in front of you. The partnership advocates on behalf of 650 business organizations in downtown focused on the economic vitality of the center city. We have long believed there is opportunity to modernize the process through which ballot measures make it to Denver's voters in order to add clarity and ensure that voters are well informed before weighing in. Thank you to Councilwoman Black and Clerk Lopez for your leadership on this critical issue. This measure represents important work to ensure that issues that end up on the ballot are clear and implementable. We are pleased that this measure is addressing some of these issues that can be confusing to some voters. We are also supportive of the move to single subject issues and a robust ballot title setting process that helps ensure voters are clear on what they're voting for and allows robust fiscal analysis. Clarity and facts are critical as it relates to ballot access. Many voters rely on the ballot info booklet, which has said some information in it that it was not objective. It is important that the city provide voters with better information to ensure they are able to make informed decisions on the issues in front of them. It is also a good step to ensure that there's training and compliance for petition gathering to ensure that voters are well educated on the issues before them. Finally, we are supportive of the idea of gathering signatures from every council district to ensure equity and buy-in from all neighborhoods. It is not representative of our city as a whole when a majority of signatures are collected from certain neighborhoods while measures affect the whole city. As stewards of downtown, we want to ensure that all voices are represented as we look to make policy and decisions that impact the city. Again, we thank you for your leadership on this and work on this critical issue, and we urge this body to vote yes on the measures before you.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to acknowledge that Council President Torres has joined the meeting. Questions from council members? Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not able to sign in the system under my own name since I'm not a committee member, but I'm signed in as a guest. Clerk Lopez, a question for you on the slide, and I'm just curious for a clarification. The difference between, let me get the slide. So many slides here, I can't, here it is. To initiate an ordinance, 2% of active registered electors. To initiate a charter amendment, 5% of registered electors. Do you know, I mean, not specific numbers, but generally, what is the difference in total between active registered voters versus the universe of registered electors, which of course includes people who've moved and we don't know about it, or they've passed away and we don't know about it. Do you know how, generally from election to election, how large that number is?
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. Paul Lopez, Denver Clerk and Recorder, Chief Elections Official for the city. It depends right now. I think our latest total registered universe is 517,000 people in the city and county of Denver. I think our total active last time, 435. Wow. So it ebbs and flows, and that just depends on the voters' participation in the last couple general cycles. So it just...
I'm just curious if you know, and you might not, I certainly don't know it, but why is there a difference in the two procedures? And Troy, I don't know if you have some insight on this from the city attorney's office. Why do we require a percentage of active voters for one thing, but a different percentage of all voters registered, whether they're active or not, for other?
Good afternoon, Troy Bratton, City Attorney's Office. Councilman Flynn, I don't know that I know the reasoning behind it. I can tell you that the process for changing our charter is governed by the state constitution. Okay. And the process for initiatives, obviously, you can do in your charter or by ordinance. So active voters is certainly a newer term that probably wasn't contemplated at the time of the Constitution, but there is a difference there. I couldn't tell you the intent.
Okay, thank you. The reasoning probably predates the lifetimes of many of us up here, if not all of us. Thank you. I believe that's the only question I had.
Clerk Lopez, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just one other thing. A lot of that comes from our defense in terms of making sure that voters are on the rolls. And previous attempts by a previous Secretary of State's administration was to try to remove as many voters from the rolls if they didn't participate in an election, in a general election. They would kick them off of the rolls. So we're trying to keep folks and give folks the benefit of the doubt, whether it's a name change, address change, or they just simply didn't vote in that election.
Thank you, sir. We want people to vote, and just because they didn't vote the last two elections doesn't mean they're not going to vote the next time around. I certainly don't want to I wouldn't advocate removing certainly what happened a few years back with the incident you're referring to. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. I want to acknowledge Councilwoman Ortega has joined us, and I believe Councilwoman Saidabaca has her hand up online.
Thank you. I have a question about what type of equity analysis went into the determination about signature thresholds in each district. And I'm curious about that because of our history of redlining and segregation and the legacy that still remains. It could be that an initiative, whether charter or ordinance, is about changing or dealing with a legacy of segregation, a legacy of systemic injustice that might not be relevant across the city or might not be something that there's a common desire to dismantle across the city. And so I'm wondering what kind of conversations we've had around potentially limiting a ballot initiative through this measure.
The idea was based on feedback from people who felt like initiatives were being put on the ballot based on signatures they were getting in certain neighborhoods and not getting them in other neighborhoods. So the idea was that, without bringing any specific examples in it, Councilman Hines likes it when I talk about the Whole Foods in Cherry Creek, but when signature gatherers can easily get a lot of signatures at the Whole Foods in Cherry Creek about some kind of measure that some of those folks might feel would protect their neighborhood, but it might impact, Council President Torres's district, and there was no signature gathering process in that district. So the idea was that this very minimal amount would be around 180, depending on the number of voters, but would just show that there was a very minimal level of support from every council district, just to show some regional support and participation in a similar way that state constitutional amendments need to have some signatures gathered from all the state Senate districts so that Denver and the Front Range cities don't have an outsized influence on how our Constitution might change.
I appreciate that, and I would love to know if there's a list of stakeholders who were at the table, who was involved in that conversation, because I'm concerned that we're modeling it after the statewide initiative. I know we're a nonpartisan body, but I believe that that was a very Republican or conservative measure at the state level that led us to that new threshold. And I understand why, say, for example, we wouldn't want, people in District 4, for example, collecting signatures to maintain segregation and having a disproportionate amount of people in their district who would want to do that and thus getting it on the ballot, where you could also limit people in Swansea or even Northeast Park Hill from getting the signatures they needed for an issue that disproportionately affects us here. I think that the intent makes sense, but I don't believe it's necessary for equity, since the whole goal of collecting signatures is to get something in front of every single voter in the city. I think that the fact that every single voter gets to weigh in on that decision is the control or the check, the balance that we need. And I don't think that those signature thresholds are necessary when the point is to get everybody to vote on it anyways. So is there a response to that? I mean, when everybody gets to vote on something, does it matter how it got there?
Again, the feedback I got from people was that they felt, I mean, using your own example, is that you wouldn't want people from my district putting something on the ballot that would impact your district. And so the idea that a very low number of signatures would have to come from every council district would just show that there was some kind of regional support across the city.
Can you tell me who people are? You keep saying you got feedback from people, but can you tell me who all was involved? Because my issue is not what gets on the ballot at all. I think in a democracy, we should all have the opportunity to put anything we want on the ballot. And that is not an issue for me at all. But I'm curious about who the people are that you were talking to. Were there any stakeholder groups that involved organizations, that involved minority stakeholders, that involved people from previous ballot initiatives? Who are the people?
I do not have those notes with me, but I will send you a list.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Councilman Flynn, Councilman Torres is on the list. Do you mind if she goes ahead since she hasn't had an opportunity yet?
Yes, but go ahead anyway.
Council President Torres.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Black. Also, line of questioning on the petition gathering and signatures. In some of the other cities that were listed in slide 19, are they doing similar kind of distribution requirements? No, we might be one of the first municipalities.
I did some research and I didn't see that other cities were doing that. I think the idea maybe came from that state amendment.
Okay. And then for Clerk and Recorder's Office, issues with process, is this just as easy to process as any other set of petitions, determining what district folks live in, things like that?
Thank you, Council President Torres. Congratulations, by the way. So our score system, our statewide database, doesn't have fields for that, and we would definitely have to work around that. The other thing is that we wouldn't be able to verify those in real time, what districts are coming from where, because our staff are just trying to quickly verify those petitions within 25 days. 25 days, right? Is our limit? Yeah, so we have a 25-day shot clock in terms of our election judges being able to verify those signatures. It would be a different process for us to be able to do that. We're Denver Elections, we can do a lot, but we would just have to go and kind of figure out how to be able to account for that. I don't think that we're going to be able to let people know if they've met that threshold in real time. We'd have to wait till all the petitions are counted, or all the signatures are verified, sorry.
Okay, if they don't know, if, for example, they were, 20, 30 signatures shy of one of the thresholds in one of the council districts, what does that do for kind of their overall petition process?
Well, I mean, if this were to pass, it wouldn't cap muster. If it didn't have so many of those petitions or so many of that threshold met, I don't believe it would pass muster. We haven't really, this is our real first look at the legislation. I think we got it today or yesterday. So I think for us, to be able to analyze that and look at that as a division and kind of look at those processes, it would be really helpful for us. Right now, we're in the middle of verifying a couple of petitions, so all hands are on deck right now over in our shop. But score isn't, like I said, score isn't set up for that yet. And then also, we'd have to come up with some new procedures in terms of if we can be able to verify those signatures and those thresholds in real time. We just don't know if those 100 signatures would be, 180 signatures would be mixed in with the thousands of them, right? So my guess is that we'd have to just kind of, see, that's the problem. We just don't have that in score, and we shouldn't, and we don't do things on paper on the walls.
Right. Okay. And I guess I like the idea. I like the idea of residents from all parts of the city being asked the question of should this go to the ballot. I think you being a former rep for Council District 3, there have probably been a number of things that have gone to the ballot that never kind of made it to the eyes of residents in Council District 3. So I like the idea that a certain amount comes from the district. I'm also thinking kind of logistically about how that might happen, and that, you know, King Soopers at Colfax and Spear, right, at the very edge of Council District 3, probably serves residents in downtown, people who commute. So if there are petition gatherers out in front of that King Soopers, how you distinguish based on a petition if it's where those residents live, because that's how you base your petition gathering. So that I think, like, logistical stuff is just where I might be curious about how it actually plays out.
Like I said, for us, I mean, we wanted to strengthen the petition gathering process in terms of be a little bit more stringent with that, and then offering training. We don't want to make it harder for folks to be able to access the ballot.
And it's a low number. I mean, 180 out of 8,000 is I think a doable number. But yeah, Councilwoman Black, I don't know if you had comments on that too.
Just to be clear for us, Council, this is Councilman Black's proposal, this particular one. We haven't seen that in BAM. I know that her and I have kind of discussed it a little bit, but we haven't had any kind of formal proposal until we saw it yesterday in terms of what that threshold would be. For us, the only problems for my administration would be logistically with SCORE in our system, and second, maintaining real-time compliance. We can do that in general. We can't do that per council district because the system's not set up for that, and that would be a little hard based on what signatures are coming in and when, and if they are valid or not.
Okay. Do you know kind of what your average rejection rate is on petitions?
It just depends.
It runs the board?
It runs the board, and it's based off of experience with the petition gatherers. If they're the folks that we always see gathering petitions, if they're paid, there's a difference between paid and volunteer. So it can run the gamut, and depending where it's at and how it's being collected.
Got it.
But hopefully the tools that we have presented to you regarding those signature, that process will help us tighten that up.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Black, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on a few things. So I've thought a lot about the process, and it is challenging. I've also talked to a number of people who work professionally in elections, and they have suggested that it is doable. But if you think about it, if you went to a store in your district to get signatures for you to get on the ballot, you need 100. You'd have to ask them what council district they live in anyway. So it's not that it's something we haven't done before. Also, most petition or signature gatherers get significantly more signatures than they need. I know some of them get double the signatures just to be on the safe side. You know, because some people don't really know where they live, or they aren't registered at that address. So they all have to be verified anyway. And I've thought a lot about how, if I was a signature gatherer, you know, standing in front of the King Soopers in District 4, which is very close to Englewood, you know, how I would do that. I would actually have a map and say, do you live in this district? And you could possibly have a different page for the people who live in that district. Again, you know, 180 standing in front of a busy grocery store, I don't think is that challenging. But I have thought a lot about it, and I think there are some ways that we can make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Flynn, you're back up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to address Councilwoman Sitavaka's concerns, the discussion at the working group, when we did talk about this, was precisely about ensuring that there was outreach to all corners of the city. Councilwoman Torres mentioned how many things get on the ballot without outreach to the west side. I'm recalling when Councilman Clark ran in 2015 in District 7, there were 9 candidates. So at least 900 signatures and more had to be gathered to get all those 9 folks on the ballot. 180 is a pretty low number. I told Councilwoman Black I would have supported a higher number, but the intent was to empower the registered voters in those parts of town that normally are not reached out to, precisely because they have not been reached out to on issues. And then come election day, with our blue book and the concerns we had with the blue book and how difficult it was to navigate the last ballot, what did a yes vote mean, what did a no vote mean on 2F, et cetera. Asking for this little modicum of outreach into some underrepresented communities is, I think, is the least we can do. And here we are doing the least we can do. As I said, I would advocate an even higher threshold, but I do support starting with the 180. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Curious, Clerk Lopez, is there in your experience, either as clerk or as a council member, have you seen something like what Councilwoman Sitavaka is talking about? I guess I'm just curious because I feel like it cuts both ways, which she acknowledged, right? But you know, there might be initiatives that are aimed at combating some of the historic practices, racist practices that we've seen. At the same time, there might be some initiatives that are specifically aimed at continuing those practices. Have you seen anything come across in your experience like that?
Repeat the question again, Councilman. I'm trying to...
I'm just sort of wondering whether we have seen, whether there's an example in any citizen-initiated ordinance across Denver that could have had a negative effect or targeted a certain community in some way.
Well, you did your homework. You're asking questions like a lawyer, Madam Councilwoman. When I was on council in 2009, 2008, 2009, I came in and there was an initiated ordinance that required the city to impound the cars of anybody who, quote unquote, looked reasonably was suspected of being in, quote unquote, an illegal alien, or, and if that was the case, it would have given the city the right to be able to impound your car. Now, I think I'm the only councilman for a long time and to date to be able to repeal the citizen-initiated ordinance because we did so within 2 years because of the fact that it violated your Fourth Amendment search and seizure, and also it was terribly illegal per our Constitution, yet the city was still impounding vehicles and property without proper due process and no right to. And then I think at this dais, a woman who came up and spoke had her car impounded and was Puerto Rican. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. So we dodged some major lawsuits with that one. It depends. It absolutely depends on what's out there and what can get on the ballot. It is a democratic process, however. And that's why I have to remind people this door swings both ways. And the democracy is messy, but it is a democracy. We will protect the democracy as much as we can. The only other thing that I would say, just from my previous life as a city councilman, is voter registration in each council district varies. Participation in each council district varies. When I was elected, I think the first time I had less than 6,000 people vote in an election in a district with 60,000 people in it. It just depends. And your signature gathering efforts are going to vary. And it will be a little different in each council district.
Got it.
That you can't avoid that.
Yeah.
We have no position on it from my office.
Uh-huh.
This is we covered most of the things in the BAM. This one was not included in the BAM. but it is something that I know council is considering, and we will follow that process. So
that's great. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I did do my homework and I had heard about that, but really appreciate you walking through kind of some of the specifics of that, because I think that feels like the kind of situation where having to get signatures from all of the different council districts would have potentially made that would have brought it to more people's attention, so that it, you know, maybe more people would have been involved in the discussion on it instead of just, you know, sort of voting it through back in 2009.
If I may add, Councilwoman, yes, it's a democratic process, and I don't, please let me be clear, I don't slam the democratic process when I said about our citizen-initiated ordinances and our right to appeal a citizen-initiated ordinance, but this one was so blatantly racist and unconstitutional, it had no business on our books. And just for the record, 2 years before becoming a councilman, I did have my car impounded for simply being Mexican on the wrong day.
Got it. Thank you. There's a couple more council members in the queue. Councilmember Hines, you're up.
Thank you, Committee Chair. Clerk Lopez, I know I've asked this before, and I think the answer was it depends, but I'm just thinking about the citizen-initiated ordinances. How much does it cost to do an election? That's a tough answer. So what about each page as we're sending ballots out citywide?
Councilman, I swear, folks, I'm not being paid for this. This is not a setup. So it used to cost $1 million citywide. And I say used to because we have a paper shortage because of the mills. We have operational costs. You just approved a contract to renew our Dominion software earlier today. That was very expensive. Prices are skyrocketing. So we have budget. So we will be coming with our budget, with our estimated cost for 2023, which includes the municipal and a November election. We're going to be north of $1 million for sure. And I'm thinking probably, I don't want to shoot from the hip, but I think maybe 1.2, 1.3, just based off of the cost of mail. It used to cost, sorry for the number, I tried to get them to change it, but it is absolutely accurate. It used to cost $6.66 a ballot.
Okay, so
not ballot, but per voter, something like that. I had them change it to 667 or 665, but it just
the numbers are the numbers, I suppose. Yeah. So I guess where I'm trying to go with this is, I was thinking about the group living ballot item. You know, majority of council passed it. I think to Councilmember Black's point, a whole lot of people in the Whole Foods Cherry Creek did sign that petition to get it on the ballot. I think just based on the people that I knew who were organizing it, I think also a fair number of folks in Council District 5 signed that, and ultimately it was rejected by the people. But I think it was the people who were inside the inverted L that were trying to use their time, their financial resources to change a citywide conversation that didn't have support citywide, but they had the resources to put it on the ballot anyway. So in my opinion, I see this 2% as a compromise, as a threshold that does require that we go outside the inverted L to get some folks to support it, so that you can't just hang out in the Whole Food at Cherry Creek or the King Soopers #1 on Spear, where I'll be going later today, even though that's not in my district. And I just want to make sure that if we're putting something on the ballot, sure, it costs elections something. It also costs the people a lot of time and energy to fund and to protect. In this case, group living, which by the way, that was the group living with, if it's 2 per household, that's discriminatory against our immigrant communities, our communities of color, our LGBT communities. I mean, there's a lot of, it wasn't necessarily openly constitutionally discriminating, but it's certainly, I believe, quite a discriminatory item. And had we had the opportunity for some ballot signatures outside the inverted L to keep that off the ballot, boy, that sure would have saved a lot of time and energy, in my opinion. So I see I was full transparency. I thought the 1% threshold was, was my favorite, but I see that less than a quarter of the total signatures have to come from particular districts, and I see that that is a reasonable compromise, so that we don't have to spend so much time and resources getting rid of things that are put on the ballot by, frankly, those who have a lot of resources. So those are just my comments. Thank you, Committee Chair.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Seda-Baca, you're back up.
Can you hear me? I just wanted to highlight that while I agree that it is important in some cases to have a threshold where we are forced to reach out to minority voices, that would be the less common instance with this. In a deep equity conversation, what we would do with this initiative is weigh the burden of the change and who would most heavily be impacted in a negative way. And so, like I said, the minority could be served by this initiative, but in the grander scheme of things, the minority would be disproportionately burdened by this change. The minority or anyone oppressed by a systemic injustice by default has the larger burden of reaching out to the majority to change the structural injustice. So when you think about a minority group or an oppressed group, they by default have less financial capital, less political capital, probably less human capital. So they're going to probably be the ones who are relying on volunteer petition gatherers, not paid ones. They're the ones who are going to probably be more challenged by transportation issues and getting across the city to collect signatures. And so I think that we have to understand that those are real impacts on our democratic process. They're valid impacts. And we also have to recognize that the only 2 entities that showed up to endorse this measure today represent the people with the most power. Colorado Concern and the Downtown Denver Partnership represent entities who have the most power in our city, not people who are marginalized. And so that is why I asked for the list of stakeholders and people involved, because I didn't see anyone consulted from minority or oppressed communities being a part of this discussion and weighing in about how it would disproportionately burden their groups if they were trying to change a systemic injustice. So just putting that out there so that we are factoring that into our decision making, because this is not a change I can support just because it doesn't achieve what we're trying to achieve. The vote, democracy, is what achieves what we're trying to achieve. The threshold is just an unnecessary barrier to people who have the least resources to fight back. Thank you.
Councilmember Kniech.
Thank you. I will just repeat a couple comments I made at the prior discussion, which is that ballot measures can be used to harm vulnerable communities, not just to advance their interests. And so, and I will, I think that it's, sometimes we just don't agree. You're not going to be able to produce the stakeholder list. You know, we just have to agree to disagree. I will just say that I have received quite a bit of feedback from individuals who are not part of any group, who feel frustrated with the ballot length. They feel frustrated with their ability to be able to be thoughtful voters on the quantity of issues that are involved, they feel overwhelmed by our election cycles. They know that they're weighty decisions, but sometimes they're fatigued. And so that feedback matters too to me, even if they're not part of an organized group. And that has included African-American residents of my own neighborhood of North Park Hill who are like, Robin, what is up with this ballot? Can't you guys do something? So I think that that feedback matters too. With that in mind, this is not my preferred route, but we don't all get to get our own personalized legislation. I believe the way to do this would be to raise the signature threshold to make it more in line with other communities. I hope we continue to have that conversation. I am not opposed to this. I won't, you know, won't vote against it just because it's not, I don't think, the best path. I think it does mean that you have to have a more legitimate base of support for an issue before it gets on the ballot. If that's a goal that it advances, I can live with it. But I am not excited about it because I see the practicality concerns that have been raised, but I do think that our voters are fatigued with the length of this ballot. They don't want to make weighty decisions that they don't have the ability to stay on top of and research, and they know that they're important decisions. They're not trying to get out of their responsibilities, but they need to balance those responsibilities with their capacities. And so, anyway, I hope we do talk about raising the signature threshold. I would rather be doing that right now than this, but I can live with it if we keep talking about the other path. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Black or Clerk Lopez, do you have any closing comments? That's it for questions in the queue. Okay. Councilmember Black, go ahead. No. Okay, great. Why don't we split these up and do 2 separate voice votes on them, given that we've heard from some council members that they would prefer to vote no. We're just hanging on for technical difficulties here for a second.
So you wanted a roll call vote?
Yes,
Madam
please.
Chair? Okay.
And I'm looking, I don't know if it's my technology. It's not up on my screen, the first one.
Got it. I do have 875 on the floor right now for approved for filing.
Okay, great. So let's start with 875.
Torres?
Aye.
Black?
Aye.
Hines?
Aye.
Knich?
Aye.
Ortega?
Aye.
Citabaca?
Aye.
Madam Chair?
Aye.
We have 8 ayes.
Great, thank you. And 876.
Torres?
Aye.
Black?
Aye.
Hines?
Aye.
Knich? Aye. Ortega?
Aye.
Citabaca?
No.
Madam Chair?
Aye.
We have 1 nay, 6 ayes.
Great, thank you. So both of those will move forward for filing. And unless there is anything else from council members, we're adjourned. Thanks.
Summer when the kids are home, but they needed help. And then instead of a litter, which is what we normally do, They actually had a mom. We got her on Saturday and thought we would have a week or so before she gave birth, but woke up to a howl at 5 a.m. on Sunday. Melody and I have never whelped puppies before, so we crammed and learned what we needed to do, and we were doggy doulas and gave birth to 7 puppies a week ago today.
We're raising